Vision Zero is quite simple. It's a world without accidents, also zero traffic emissions, and then zero mobility barriers, which is a topic that is rarely talked about, but not everyone has access to mobility, and I think it should be different. And you mentioned at the beginning our claim, where we talk about a mobility ecosystem for all, and that's exactly that we believe technology that we already work on today, also at Peregrine, has the ability to get us closer to zero accidents, zero traffic emissions, and zero mobility barriers. And we know that we cannot do it alone, right? So it's not that we now started a company and say, now this is the way to achieve Mission Zero, but we believe that this is a partnering exercise with many, many companies. And that's why we always like the subline of that claim is we want to enable teams to build a safer and more sustainable mobility ecosystem for all.
I actually think that especially for European players, but actually more generally, there is an enormous opportunity for players in the automotive sector to think about open standards and open source. I think there is still a very strong feeling, a culture that as an original car manufacturer, you're responsible for the security and for everything that's happening with that vehicle.
I think personally, and not everyone shares that opinion, but I think car makers, especially in Europe, have a big chance to be a driver of that transformation. And I see that as actually as a positive sign if they move now quick enough and help us to do that change.
If you look out, what is your perspective? Where do you think we could be in terms of AI and self-driving in Germany? Do you have a positive view there? And of course, coming back to our educational background, training the next generation, what are aspects that you would love to see?
I think location and distances will matter much less in, let's say, 10 years onwards. And that will go on and on. So that starts from today, we talk about remote work, delivery services. But the more autonomous mobility you get, the more actually this comes into play. So if it doesn't matter anymore from where I work or where I get my goods from, and there's some engine in between that just starts serving me, then I don't need to live in the city center. I can actually live at the seaside and still have almost the infrastructure of a large city at a click, at my fingertips.
Hello and welcome to 42X Wolfsburg edition. Today we're here with Dr. Steffen Heinrich from Peregrine Technologies, CEO and founder, a really cool startup here in Berlin that is in the area of self-driving, computer vision, next generation AI systems. We will certainly know more about it. Hi, Steffen. Really cool that you were able to join us. Cool. Steffen and I actually just got to know each other through a common friend and found that we share a lot of interests in similar topics. Certainly, research, the future of technology, especially in a German European context, especially in a automotive mobility context. And allow me to introduce Steffen a little bit. Steffen, you correct me right after if I said something that I shouldn't have or omitted something. Steffen holds a PhD from the Free University of Berlin in robotics from a quite well-known group by Professor Rojas. That's the professor who won the championships in robo football several times for, I guess, Germany and the Free University. And Steffen has been working on software for self-driving cars for more than a decade in Silicon Valley and in Germany. And not too long ago, Steffen, you remind us exactly when you founded Peregrine Technologies. That's a Berlin-based startup that brings AI, next generation video analysis for transportation customers, to fleet intelligence and management. And how that works, he will explain in a little bit. I really liked your claim on the website that you empower teams to build a safer and more sustainable mobility ecosystems for all. And that, of course, is very much in line with our thinking to build a curriculum for the next generation software engineers in automotive and mobility ecosystems. So we just agreed before we started the recording that we need to follow up and really think through how we might be able to collaborate in the future. Steffen, anything you want to add about yourself that folks should be aware of, or that you want them to be aware of?
Thanks, Max, for this very kind introduction. Well, obviously, there are many touch points also with what you guys are doing, and I'm super happy also when we will integrate that later in our talk. But I think it's interesting to see that you can come from computer science like I did, and without being a car guy, you end up in automotive. And actually, I did not know at the time that there was room for me, in shaping at least a little part of the future of mobility. And I found this super interesting, and it kind of also shaped my career and brought me to very exciting places. And so I can just again encourage also everyone who's involved in your university that there's a lot of stuff you can do with computer science, and it touches so many domains, and therefore I'm happy to chat with you about that. I'm also learned a lot about the domain automotive, and I think that's super great because it's an industry that is now in full transition. And I think we can also talk a little bit about that, how old industries can actually leverage this new talents that's coming up. And these are the things I'm super interesting to talk about today with you.
And I couldn't agree more. If you think about the different waves, and I think we're both roughly the same age, right? We saw this internet thing come along, and at first it kind of got to publishing, then to music. And at that point, you're still thinking like, sending around books and physical things, that's far out. And obviously, that's become totally commonplace to send around consumer goods and organize the digital economy in that way. But now we're going into the third wave with substantially different hard industrial products moving or embracing digital technologies and being disrupted. And I think you chose a very good time and industry to get involved. In fact, we have a tradition to allow our guests to basically formulate the first questions themselves. So when I asked you what's the first question I should be asking, you suggested to ask about your Vision Zero. So Steffen, what is Vision Zero?
I think what brought me to mobility or automotive at the time, so we studied new forms of how we could build software for self-driving cars at the time, and I think the main motivation for the team that I joined here in Berlin, and you mentioned Professor Rojas, was zero accidents. So being able to go from a couple of lines of code to actually improve the intelligence of a vehicle, like a heavy device that is used by millions of people and is actually the cause of, unfortunately, of accidents on the road, but also is blocking a lot of room in cities, that we can actually impact that. That was the main driver. And Vision Zero is quite simple. It's a world without accidents, also zero traffic emissions, and then zero mobility barriers, which is a topic that is rarely talked about, but not everyone has access to mobility, and I think it should be different. And you mentioned at the beginning our claim, where we talk about a mobility ecosystem for all, and that's exactly that we believe technology that we already work on today, also at Peregrine, has the ability to get us closer to zero accidents, zero traffic emissions, and zero mobility barriers. And obviously, I'm super happy to chat with you today how we can fulfill our mission. And we know that we cannot do it alone, right? So it's not that we now started a company and say, now this is the way to achieve mission zero, but we believe that this is a partnering exercise with many, many companies. And that's why we always the subline of that claim is we want to enable teams to build a safer and more sustainable mobility ecosystem for all, because this is exactly why we think we can use the sensor data that we work with. You mentioned that we work with computer vision to extract, what's actually going on in a video feed, to understand the context, that we can use these data points to help others to build services on top of that. So we see us as a data service provider from video feeds that are actually coming from cars and that are sitting in vehicles that we drive today. And I think that is also the next step for mobility for all, because I believe, smart infrastructure or traffic video systems won't be in every town. If you focus on Germany, there are small towns. Not everyone's living in Berlin or in Hamburg or in Munich. And these smart city projects we hear about that have millions in funding, they're usually in big cities and they work there and the business case works there. But I believe everyone will still have access to a car in some form or the other, sometimes owned, sometimes leased. And these vehicles will be everywhere, and we can use them as a smart infrastructure. And that, I think these two sides are the core of Peregrine and what we work on.
Very cool. Allow me to dip in a little bit. So first, I very much appreciate your notion of this being a partnership environment, right? I would use the neology a co-opetition, right? There is a lot that you share, and of course you compete, right? It's not everybody is loving each other, and there's no competition at play. But I think it's really the notion of this new and these new environments that. At the one hand, yes, you're pitching for the same clients. Obviously, you want to get users and things like that are very competitive. But at the same time, what the challenge is for all of us together is that we need to create something that works on a critical mass, that generates a critical mass and that generates value for these various players. So I was quite happy last week we announced Microsoft as the first partner of 42 Wolfsburg, and Gunnar Kilian, the Volkswagen board member, commented that for him this is a great sign because he learned that digitization is a partnership game in the end, and I couldn't agree more. In fact, my background is working on IoT interoperability and things like that. We had Vin Cerf, one of the inventors of TCP/IP, join us for a fireside chat some time ago, and we have been working together on these topics for quite a while. And I actually think that especially for European players, but actually more generally, there is an enormous opportunity for players in the automotive sector to think about open standards and open source. If I first talked to with friends from Volkswagen, the signal was like, this is not what we do. We need to be in full control. I think there is still a very strong feeling, a culture that as an original car manufacturer, you're responsible for the security and for everything that's happening with that vehicle. So if I may, what's your perspective? Do you see the same from the established players? Do you agree that this is something where we have to learn together how to embrace having open communication systems that are not fully controlled by the OEMs? What's your experience? What's your perspective there?
It's a very, very good question. I think I experienced the same thing, and not just from a single from one company, but being in the automotive industry for I think 7 or 8 years, from 2012 onwards. that was surprising to me how everyone, especially of the traditionals, tried to do their own thing. Everything was, even sometimes for vehicles or for vehicle types, would be developed, um, let's say, car related. So I built a new car and I built my software ecosystem around that single car model. And that was a kind of an industry standard, and that was also how suppliers then were treated, and were basically invited to join that. And I think many things will change around that. So we know already that OEMs want to actually develop more in-house, which I think is a good sign, because you need not only to be in charge, but you need to understand everything end to end, and you need to understand where can I innovate and where are potentially others better, to innovate together with me. And that is where I see this competition and also the strength. And there will always be companies that have a certain strength and DNA where they're better suited to do something and bring a certain standard into the industry. That might also be around cloud computing or cybersecurity, which is not maybe the core DNA of someone who builds a car. But at the same time, you need to have these strengths in house, and I'm super happy to see that a lot of my former colleagues actually are now grouping together also in cool units and building cool stuff. And we want to be a part of this ecosystem, and we think data services are still something, or even like, let's say, digital products are still something where the industry struggles a bit. And you can build it when you start on a white sheet of paper, and with a lot, a greenfield approach, you have some advantages. And we want to bring this into the industry. So I didn't leave automotive, to do this now without automotive players, but specifically together with them. And I'm super curious, for the years to come, how we can work together.
Now that reminds me, what we didn't mention in the intro was you spent some time at Volkswagen. Can you say a couple of words about that?
Yes, so maybe to link, I worked for a research department at Freie Universität Berlin, together with Professor Rojas. The team was one of the three teams that participated in the DARPA Urban Challenge. It was a research competition in the US about self-driving cars, I think 2007, 2008. When the team came back, I was still a student, and I joined them right after their return from the US. And we had this vision to put this technology into, let's say, the taxi business. Today you would say the ride-hailing business, but at that time there was just a taxi. But we said, okay, let's have an autonomous taxi in Berlin and drive. And we did a drive to the Brandenburg Gate at the time. And I think Angela Merkel, a couple of years later, also drove the car. It was super exciting. But then I saw this kind of it needed to go into the automotive industry, and that's why I did my PhD in cooperation with the industry. I joined VW. I had the chance to go to the US, to California, to join the electronic research lab of VW, and worked with the colleagues over there on several automated driving projects. My main focus was motion planning. So it's basically, if you know everything already around the environment, and what the perception system of the car can do and see, then you need still to decide what actions to take. And that is what motion planning is. And I did my PhD in that. And later, a couple of years later, when I was back already in the group research in Wolfsburg, I then joined a new strategy unit for digitization with the new CDO, Johan Jungwirth. And I worked for him for 2 years, specifically on partnerships in the space of self-driving cars. And it was a super exciting time. I loved my time there. And that's why I also have this strong desire, to find ways how to innovate in that space. Because I think personally, and not everyone shares that opinion, but I think car makers, especially in Europe, have a big chance to be a driver of that transformation. And I see that as actually as a positive sign if they move now quick enough and help us to do that change. On the other side, if they don't move quick enough, then there's also a problem or a risk that we have in innovating in mobility in Europe.
Good to hear that we are very much on the same page here. I think the opportunity is very crisp now, and there is a lot of people moving, a lot of different parts of the world moving, but now is really still a good time for that. Okay, let's move a little forward. We planned a couple of topics, and one of them is your perspective on artificial intelligence, AI. I think we're probably agreeing that machine learning is actually the more correct term, because the emotional attachment and the misconceptions around AI are pretty significant. Um, in contrast to things like blockchain, that I think is more of a dream than a reality. I do think AI is very, very concrete and already having an enormous impact, but not as obvious as many people think when they think about science fiction and AI, right? It's slightly different, but I shouldn't answer the question that I want to ask you. Steffen, what's your perspective?
I I shared, I think, to most of what you just said already, that people often don't even know that they are using some form of machine learning already. And on the other hand, we have this discussion about AI, which, especially in society, is then often directly linked with movies like Terminator and other science fiction movies. And we have then not a really good discussion of what machine learning can actually do for us today. So people are using tools, speech recognition tools. They often, if they hear a song on the radio, they have apps to click a button and they identify, hey, that was actually that song, and I can now use it in my playlist. And I think personally that a lot of, I would consider them as basic stuff that has been done in the machine learning industries for let's say the last 10 years will already transform how we build products like manufacturing. It will change mobility and optimize, for example, traffic flows, or manage better how people go from A to B. It will help us to serve more people in health at a better quality, and many other domains. And that is not, in 20 years. This is already in 2 years, in 5 years. There's so many great companies are already starting to run for that and making that better. And for me personally, when I started, after having my first courses on, it was called AI actually at the time, but we did a lot of pattern recognition and neural nets. Unfortunately, there was not the deep learning trend. I think it was 2007, 8, when we looked into the literature, and we felt like, okay, it would be so great to have more data. It would be so great to have more compute. The limitations were clear, but we didn't have the opportunities to act on it. And then I was working on these soccer playing robots that you mentioned before I actually went to self-driving. And it was so fun to see that some computers are actually really good in solving some adults, like some tasks that are above the performance of an adult, let's say playing chess. And then sometimes computers are not even smart enough to outperform, let's say, a toddler in image recognition, memory playing, or something like that. So because if you draw a vehicle with pen and paper, and then you make a photo of a vehicle, and then you take a comic of a vehicle, for a toddler, that these are basically three cars. They just look a little bit different. For a machine learning algorithm, even with some of the good ones today, you might fail even to detect one of these as a car, depending on your training set and what you did before. So this paradoxon actually led me then, fascinated me, and I was convinced that I want to work more in this domain, and I want to see, how can we get closer to human level performance, but then also how can we use it to make work so let's say human and machine cooperation in the workforce easier. And that applies to driving cars, the same as manufacturing, where robots and people would work hand in hand, right? So I don't always see this as job replacements, which is also society topic that is coming up too often.
Very true. And you also mentioned a couple of risks that you see. And as one would expect from an entrepreneur, you see some substantial risks, but you also see the risk of missing out, of not getting it right. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think, there I would sometimes hope we start the discussions around AI, and then it goes into what we just said about the Terminator or Star Wars topics, and I think that's the wrong way. We should actually really look into information bias. So is the engineer taking the approach of having the right data set? And there's so many, unfortunately, sad videos, if you think about it, on the internet already, where people just designed this data set in the wrong way because they forgot, that there are different skin colors, which is probably the worst. And then there are others where people, let's say in the field of autonomous driving, you should not just take images from good weather, but there is also bad weather. So you need also to make your algorithm work when it rains or when it's dark. So, and that should not be, in companies, the responsibility of a single engineer. And we need discussions around, how can we, this is also about compliance, this is about innovation, and then we need a diverse discussion around that, and you need also a process actually to address this. And also in the field of machine learning, I think we have some steps to do to find roles in like this job sector. And you usually don't need a computer scientist for that. You need actually very a wide range of domain experts to figure that one out. And talent and education, here we are, right? So this is why we need a very diverse set of talents going forward in machine learning.
Totally agree. We also talked about the regulation, right? I've worked for more than a decade in internet governance, and again, what I came out with is that the mindset about finding a solution, deliberating means looking for a solution together. While what we have right now are most of the time scenarios where it's them against us. Somebody believes the other side is doing it wrong, right? And they need to be stopped, or you really need to make a point. I've seen a very well done while Anglo-Saxon documentary about bias in AI that is on Netflix right now, and it was mainly about face recognition. And I do see challenges there. I don't think it's right that you should be out there doing face recognition with people in the public, period. But the way that it was framed was totally as if the police had the dark vision of enforcing, the police state, or having total control. I don't think that's right. I think we're all trying to come to design a world that is inhabitable and positive for people to live, that give freedoms. So my notion here would really be on um, uh, creating scenarios where we are looking for solutions rather than to stop somebody to implement a particular vision. But anyway, we're getting a little bit distracted in a good way. The next topic I wanted to come back to actually is your vision um, of zeros, zero accidents, zero traffics, zero mobility barriers. And I really like your point about the mobility barriers. In fact, I would argue that the accessibility stories that you already have with technologies are some of the most convincing arguments, where you really see what benefits a technology has, right? When it comes to screen readers, when it comes to um, systems that assist the deaf or the mute, it's just amazing what the tech does. And so if you project out and you're looking, I don't know what you're comfortable with. I think it should be beyond a year, starting with 5 years, 10 years. up to 50 years. There should be a limit. I don't think we should talk about 500 years because then we don't have a single reference point anymore. But and hopefully we're still around then. But if you look out, what is your perspective? Where do you think we could be in terms of AI and self-driving in Germany? Will, do you have a positive view there? And of course, coming back to our educational background, training the next generation, what are aspects that you would love to see?
Yeah, I like that you started slicing the look into the future, because it's, for me, also how I like to do it. So in the next year, we already will see some forms of self-driving services. We already hear them in the news, and usually these are prototypes, and there's a safety driver operating the car. And the outlook of 50 years is always very hard to do, because you usually underestimate what can be done in 50 years. If you just look back 50 years, I think nobody would have guessed some of our innovations that we have today. I think I would bring it even on another level from self-driving. I think location and distances will matter much less in, let's say, 10 years onwards, and that will go on and on. So that starts from today. We talk about remote work, delivery services, but the more autonomous mobility you get, the more actually this comes into play. So if it doesn't matter anymore from where I work or where I get my goods from, and there's some engine in between that just starts serving me, then I don't need to live in the city center. I can actually live at the seaside and still have almost the infrastructure of a large city at a click, at my fingertips. And that's very interesting. And I think that a lot of innovation will be about stuff that other people in logistics know for years, this like just in time services. And I think they will come into consumer environments as well. Today, people get upset if their package is not delivered within a time window of 2 hours. It already starts, right? And we have now companies delivering food to your door in a matter of minutes. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And I think Germany has a potential to also leading that transition, especially in these B2B tech fields. But we need to move now. And I think that was true already 5 years ago. But now we see some more speed also with the big companies we have, because I think Germany, without the structure we have, we need the investments and we need also the projects with the big corporations in order to get our wheels spinning. We don't have the equivalent funding sizes that we see in the US or in China. So I think we can use the good old German Mittelstand as well as the big corporates to use that as a investment accelerator. And that doesn't need to be always fundraising. It can also be projects. And then also you said co-petition, but also working together and forming new joint projects and products. That's a big chance, but we both know that we have some limitations still there. It takes too long. Procurement and also legal is sometimes struggling to work with smaller companies. And that is what we need to bridge very, very soon if we want to have that innovation coming from startups. And I hope that this will happen. And then another point, which is really kind of a sad one, is that I still think we are leading in many fields in research, and we have a big problem of transferring our, let's say, wins from the professors and the postdocs and everyone involved into great businesses. So it's really like a rare story that you hear that this is actually happening. Maybe now in COVID times, it currently happens in the vaccine business, but it's a rare one, right? So it would be fantastic to see that also in deep tech.
So thanks, Philip, Steffen. I wanted to allow you basically, but ask you really, what role can Peregrine play in that space? We gave our listeners a bit of an idea what space you're in, but to yeah, how would you describe the actual service once you guys are fully developed? What services, what benefits does it offer?
Sure. So maybe I can first explain how our technology works today. So we work with customers to equip their vehicles, commercial fleet vehicles usually, with connected plug-and-play dash cams. So that would be the easiest way to understand it. And these intelligent dash cams then record both, car-centric and also street view information from every drive. And basically, that allows us in real time to analyze the video with our unique machine learning software. And so we help drivers basically to avoid risk and improve their efficiency. And for us, it's really important that we drive a lot of what we call unique kilometers, and we collect from each drive also new understanding of the environment and what can happen and why actually things are happening. And that in the end even goes as far that we can help urban planners with actionable information. We can tell them, look, this is how your this certain road segment or intersection is functioning, and that is not how it should be, because you have heavy trucks intersecting trajectories of kids on bikes on their way to school. Potentially, you want to think about that. And these are actually things where we believe that our technology can be used, and we don't want to do this alone. I said we have a partnering approach. We build a software development kit, an SDK that you can integrate into your existing technology stack, and that transfers basically visual information from a video stream into machine readable formats, and then you can use it in your data centers to actually make decisions on top of that. And we consider that as making your operations a bit more transparent. But at the same time, I think that is very core to where we come from. We don't care about you mentioned face detection and all that. We don't care about who's actually standing in front of the vehicle. So we anonymize imagery in total. We don't want to know the ID of a person. We don't want to have an identifier such as a license plate. We take that completely out. But we want to know, what is actually the position of a pedestrian on the road? What is his posture or her posture, in order to understand risk and then help others to build either a better road setup, or to change the routing of a mobility service, or even to improve your driving skills as a professional driver. That goes into these domains. And I think even also in sustainability, we believe if you have more information about your surroundings, you can adapt your driving, and you can. We know that in urban environments, we could save more fuel and later on also energy, to make the whole operation more efficient and less CO2 emitting in the end.
Makes a lot of sense. So it's really assisted driving and learning in the longer run. For all the 42 students and the potential 42 students, of course, Steffen and I started the conversation about whether this might be interesting as a internship and potential working place for our students, and we're happy to keep you informed about the progress there. Now, I have a pretty clear picture of what you see as the challenges and the outcomes of where you'd like to see things in, the mid future, foreseeable future. Do you have kind of some aspects, a list of things that you would like to see politicians, cities, big companies, other stakeholders address? I assume that you're addressing those that Peregrine can address itself. You're already on them, but what do you think needs to happen if you cast back from that ideal state and you're going, okay, first we need to make sure these elements fall in place?
I think a couple of minutes ago you mentioned also regulation and machine learning, and I think it would now be easy to say, we need less regulation. I think that wouldn't also be right. We need just the right regulation for machine learning, and it starts for me, in my thinking, that there is research and development where we should allow more freedom, but at the same time have a lot of transparency from these projects. What are they actually doing? So if you are researching, you should be able to, get more access to certain data points, but at the same time, for society, explain precisely what you're actually researching on and why this is for greater good for society. But I think that handshake would be extremely valuable. Let's take the faces, for example. If you want to build a system that, let's go to the automotive world, that stops for every pedestrian in every condition, then you should be able to have access to data sets in research, at least, or in your development phase, that give you the most diverse set of pedestrians, and also different clothing and umbrellas and whatnot could be there, but then also faces and like appearances of people. And in that regard, I think it's really important to give a corridor where safety applications can be developed when there's a greater good, for example, less accidents. As soon as you switch that to a product, then the framework should be act completely differently, and it should say you shouldn't take in data. You should not, your data set needs to be anonymized right away. Maybe you don't even take in data later on, just for corrections. But I think as soon as you have these two steps, you also enable a lot of innovations for startups or for like students, because in a research mode you would have more freedom to take in data. I strongly believe that there is room for innovation. Obviously, that needs also to be done with a legal framework. But I sometimes feel, especially in Europe, we do the regulation first, and then we do a framework, and then then we get into the researching phase, and then we say, oh, we cannot do this, and here we need to do some extra loops there, and then it slows, or you make compromises because of the framework, and you're actually designing your research according to a framework that did not even know what the research will be in the future. And I think that's the wrong way. But we already see, I'm also active in the AI association, KI Bundesverband, and we really work a lot there to at least comment on such new regulations and give our expertise, and hope that the policymakers take in some of our advice, and it works really well. It's a really great group of people that contributes there in addition to their daily work, and we hope that we can help to shape a good setup for everyone.
Sounds compelling. I certainly had the experience that the way AI products are rolled out is very different. One of my friends and colleagues from Google, Blaise Aguirre-Siacas, runs a pretty big AI R&D team in Seattle. And what he told me is that you used to have these big announcements, I don't know, Apple Developer Conference, and now here's the new product and it ships globally. For products that have machine learning embedded, it's much more local, because you certainly want to test in a variety of use cases and cultures, location settings, etc., how the product is behaving. So it's really ripening over time. That's one observation I wanted to contribute. And another is something that we have discussed as part of a think tank in Berlin, the Internet and Society Collaboratory, and that was to legally define the beta status. Beta is something that's used a lot in especially modern network tech, but you just slap it on a something that you consider just out of prototype phase, probably. But if it was a legally defined term, and you'd say, okay, you can call it beta, there's some things that are easier in terms of data collection and what you do in terms of improving the product, but you can only do it up to, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, 100,000 users, whatever the exact limitations is. I don't know that, but I think that goes in the direction that you mentioned, right? We need to generate the freedom to experiment And at the same time, that cannot be an excuse to say, well, my product is better for several years and millions of users. And because what we do know is that it's a few dedicated individuals that care about these things, data protection and the rules behind them. And the mass are fairly um, indifferent, not when you ask them, but when you look at their actual usage. People complain about Google and several aspects of the tools all the time. Market share doesn't change, a percentage point by that. So I really feel that this is an expert discussion, but it shouldn't be dominated by the expert that is the most eloquent and the loudest and the most provocative and media savvy, right? We need to really balance the different aspects out there, and that's difficult, I think. And if you look at the bigger scheme of things, right? China just not asking people at all, just implementing what seems to be best on a systemic level, and the American U.S. system being very liberal in what they allow, and then kind of cleaning up afterwards. I think Europe is strategically in a good position, but not forever, right? One of the other two systems is bound to produce something that will become a de facto standard. That's the way I would phrase this.
Absolutely. So don't get me wrong. So I think what we did in GDPR, also with respect to AI system, is first of all good and also super interesting in with thinking about innovation. It's just about how can we create new products, how can we iterate fast, how can we also like what is necessary to in with forms of transparency. I would definitely think it would help, especially startups, a lot to have a framework to also a bit of freedom from research to pre-development, let's say. And I think there are some ideas around that, and hopefully we can also get that in addition. And then I think the factor caring about a lot about data privacy is a strength. It just needs to make sure innovation is not like stopped at its very very beginning.
Yeah, plus one to that. And while I have to say I am, I guess, a pragmatist and an optimist to some degree in terms of our data practices. I also think that the data protection, the European Data Protection Act, is a huge asset midterm, and that we're more likely to be the part of the world that is going to inspire good practices and thereby hopefully the winning practices in this space than not. So it's a challenge, but it's a challenge all over the planet, and we are in a better position now than we were a couple of years ago. And I have a feeling, Stefan, that this is not the last time we talk about this, and this is also not the last venue where we discuss this. I hope that the conversation, especially in the automotive context, will be intense around this, because things like mobile phones and cars are identity anchors, right? Like there's no doubt when you are on out anywhere in a car, that car will have an identifier, and certain conditions, certain parties will always be allowed to check who you are, right? And then the whole chain unravels. I don't think it's obvious how it's going to work, but we will need a very good identity management and hence data management system in this automotive context, and that will be a really interesting conversation. Now, we come to the last section of the show, which is where we are looking for thought leaders and like you to help us build the manual for happy software engineers. The idea is that we're a very digital, very obviously networked education school, and we still believe that some things are written down and packaged up as a book that deserve to be recognized as such, to be read and complement the practice that you do. And you've shared in our conversation before that now that since you have founded the company, you get less and less time to read. I know exactly what you're talking about. This is a challenge, but that makes it even clearer in retrospect which books had an impact on you. And those are the recommendations that we are looking for, books that have a long shelf life that people should read, or that you pick up again and again after certain periods. So you brought 3 books for us, and let's start with the first one. I do not know this one, so I'm particularly interested to hear what it is about and why you recommend it.
Yeah, so the first one I picked was inspired by Marty Kagan, and it's basically about, let's say, building products. I think that the punchline must be something like building products that people love, or that your users love. I don't remember exactly, but what I remember from that book is it gives you an understanding like how you build successful products and what the process should be. And I think, in my observation, when we look in our ecosystem, what we lack a little bit, I think we have good engineers, we have like a software engineering level, which is also competitive, but there are not too many companies that build complex digital products. Obviously, now you would say there are some. That's true, there's some, but in general in the industry, there's a lot of still manufacturing or electrical engineering when we look into our big companies, and that's why having product managers and also product owners that really learn from the beginning how to work with the users, user-centric, customer-centric workflows. That is really good about this book, and I think it's one of the standard things you should read if you care about building digital products. I love that, and it's one of these books where you still look stuff up. Where sometimes I think, I have now a process, but how can I do that better? Then I would still go to the shelf and do some reading. But as I said, these books, all of the books I mentioned today, are some years old. Today, I'm more reading quickly blogs and some other like more individual, shorter things, which is actually a bad thing. But somehow building a company comes with the problem that you have less time.
No, no judgment. I think there's no good and bad. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I do like the term brain food quite a bit. I think it's interesting, how um, health health savvy and how important sports and health has become. But the information diet, right, what we read and watch, is discussed, but not in the same way that it actually infiltrates the way you think about stuff. Anyway, if you want to throw in recommendations for good blogs to read, we take that just as well. When you described the inspired book, I want to give a recommendation back. In that category, the book that I really liked was Enchanted Objects by David Rose from the MIT Media Lab. He talks about how smart products, smart objects can be designed in a way so that they're intuitive to use and have these qualities, but in an emotionally charged way. So I really got a lot from that book, and maybe it's one that makes it onto your bad nightstand. The second one you recommend is better known, but I'm sure not everybody knows, and your take on it is what I'm particularly interested in. It's 0 to 1 from Peter Thiel, and even the author is controversial, I would say. So please share your perspective on him and the book.
Yeah, potentially, it's like since the last couple of years, he's even more controversial because of some politics that might be true. I definitely didn't pick it because of that one. But the book itself, I think, really helped me to understand a little bit, or challenged my thinking, let's say, because now you could argue, okay, after some years, everybody knows a little bit about 0 to 1, and it's about really, um, how to think about where to bring in innovation. It's about also the whole red ocean, blue ocean theory. You're finding your niche, building a let's say, monopoly even in a niche, which is kind of an interesting metaphor, I think, because he really makes that point. If you build something new, you shouldn't, be involved in a lot of competition, because it just slows you down. You should really be able to execute in a straight line, actually coming, in this small degree already to a really good business. And then for him, the whole part from like 1 to the other 100, until 100%, that's not the interesting bit, but really building the first step. And he summarizes, I think, several lectures he gave I think at Stanford it was, and writes this together with one of the students. And to me, really, like, coming from Germany and I started my first company when I was 15. Even there, I had a different thinking as an entrepreneur, and it really helped me, to think more contrarian also, and challenge the current status.
Cool. And especially that tip about the Stanford lectures sounds really intriguing, because you get a compact version that you can listen to. Nice. Then your last one, I didn't know at all. So making the modern world, materials and dematerialization, by a colleague, Václav Smil. I don't know him. I don't know the book. Really cool. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, to be honest, I would have had to look up as well. So the author, I think, published many good books. I haven't, or at least they were recommended to me. But the one that really is something I would recommend is Making the Modern World. It's a lot about, I think, people know more about that thinking nowadays from Elon Musk, because he kind of hijacks this whole trend of how to think about building new, or let's say finding principles on how to build new things, and where to put the efforts, what to combine, and basically how to make the modern world. It's not, inspired, and 0 to 1 is something you just read for an hour. Making the Modern World is a bit more dry, and it also goes deeper into physics and elements and materials. But if you really, thinking about creating something new and how things come together, then also like touch points to bionics and all of that. This is a really interesting book, but it's not something you read for fun. It's something you have to have a fresh mind to follow with the author. At least that's how I remember it.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now, and it seems to have a fairly strong sustainability edge as well, right? Like understanding the supply chains, the materials that you're using, the energy that goes into them, right? Those core aspects that, really the transparency that hopefully is on the rise with things like the Internet of Trust by Siemens, where they're going through the whole production chain, and commitments that are being made about transparency, and that allow us to even understand the benefits and shortcomings, why something might be more expensive, and you still want to spend that money because it's actually invested in something good. So thanks for those recommendations. That brings us to the end of our session, but I want to give you the last word. Any points you thought I should have asked and I didn't? Any jokes you wanted to make but you didn't? Anything you want to leave us with?
I spare you with bad jokes, but maybe the last bit is more, to everyone who's also now in your new network, and the students to come. I think, the last 18 months have been heavy on everyone. But now, on the other hand, I want everyone to think about the opportunities we have in such a situation where a lot of things are paused at the moment, and we have a restart hopefully coming up in a couple of months. And what to do with it, it's like a lot of people suffered in many dimensions from that pandemic. But I think we have also the opportunity to make a lot of things better afterwards, and at least that opportunity we should really use and make use of. We at Peregrine, we want to be a part of that with the Vision Zero. But at the same time, if you want to learn more about computer vision, then first of all, check out our website or get in touch with us. We are looking forward to see more machine learning students coming along and join our journey. So thanks for the opportunity to be part of this podcast, Max.
Thanks, Steffen. And as said before, this was really cool. I hope it's the first of many exchanges. Welcome to the 42 family. Cheers.